I always thought I had a pretty solid life. I'm in my early 50s, got a good job in finance, a steady income, and an office with a view that could make you feel like you've got it all figured out. Gina and I had been married for 5 years, and from the outside, everything seemed perfect. We lived in a nice house, went on vacations that made people envious, and had all the things you're supposed to have at this age. But it wasn't as smooth as it looked. The tension had been creeping in for a while, like a slow leak no one noticed until the pipes burst. It wasn't the work. That was pressure, sure, but it was something I could handle. I made sure our wealthy clients' investments were secure, made the numbers work, built a reputation for being someone who could be counted on. At home, though, that was a different story. Gina's mom, Helen, was the first problem. She always found a way to make me feel small, like I was never going to live up to her expectations. Every time I sat down to dinner with her family, I could feel her eyes sizing me up, comparing me to her ex, Roger. She never missed a chance to talk about how successful Roger was, how he'd traveled the world, leading meetings with executives while I was stuck working a steady job, doing the same thing day in and day out. Nothing I did seemed to impress her. It wasn't just her, though. Gina didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she didn't want to. Either way, I was the one covering most of our shared expenses while quietly helping her family, and no one seemed to acknowledge it. It hit me at dinner one night, after yet another backhanded comment about how I wasn't Roger. It wasn't anything new, but this time something snapped inside me. I'd been holding this all in, covering for Gina's family, for her, emotionally and financially. And I was done. Done pretending like it was all okay. I stood up from the table, feeling the heat rise in my chest. "I'm not paying for this anymore," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "Not one more penny for your family. I'm done." The room went dead silent, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd finally said something that mattered. The silence after I'd spoken felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't just the shock from my words hanging in the air. It was everything that had led up to that moment. The years of quiet resentment, the dismissals, the unspoken expectation that I was just supposed to keep giving and giving without any recognition. The next few weeks were rough. Gina didn't say much after that dinner. She gave me the cold shoulder like I was the problem. But it wasn't just about that one fight. It was about everything I'd been ignoring for too long. I started digging through our finances, the way I should have done a long time ago. I went over our bank statements, checking where the money was going. I thought I'd be looking at big numbers, the kind that came from a bad investment or a few bad decisions. Instead, I found something even worse. I'd been paying off Gina's family's debts, her mother's medical bills, their rent, even contributed to her mom's retirement fund. And that was just the start. I sat there in front of the screen, feeling sick to my stomach. I'd been covering for them all this time, and Gina? She never even said thank you. Every time I brought it up, she'd make excuses for her mother, brush it off like it was nothing. Her family always acted like I owed them something, like I was just supposed to be their ATM. It was like they had this quiet agreement that I'd pick up the slack, and Gina was right there, silently playing along. But it wasn't until one night at dinner that the full picture started to come together. Tom, Gina's brother, was going on about this new motorcycle he'd just bought. He'd been whining for months about how tight money was, how he could barely pay his bills. But now he had a brand new bike, and it wasn't cheap. Then Amy, Gina's sister, mentioned how she'd bought a bunch of new clothes, designer stuff, the kind she'd always claimed she couldn't afford because things were tough. That's when I started putting it all together. They'd been acting like they were broke, like they needed help, but their lifestyles didn't match the story they'd been selling. It was like they were playing a game, and I was the fool paying into it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called the bank the next day, got the transaction records for the last 2 years, and as I went through them, line by line, my stomach twisted tighter. Nearly $60,000 had gone from my account to theirs. Medical bills, rent payments, and a few transfers I couldn't even trace. The numbers didn't lie. My job had been good to me, sure, but I'd been keeping their lives afloat, padding their debts, making sure they could keep up appearances. And what did I get in return? Nothing but silence and a series of excuses about how things were just tough right now. Gina always brushed it off, claiming we were just going through a rough patch. Except now it didn't feel like a rough patch. It felt like a lie. Everything about this family, this whole setup, it was all one big manipulation, and I had been too blind to see it. But not anymore. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. And it wasn't just the money, it was the feeling of being used, of being someone's stepping stone. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. I had been the one carrying the load all this time. And Gina, she wasn't some innocent bystander in this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything. The transactions, the lies, the family dinners where I was the punching bag. And Gina, she had been right there, letting it all happen. Maybe she wasn't the one asking for the money, but she sure as hell wasn't stopping it either. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. When I finally did speak to her, my voice was shaky. Almost a whisper at first, but I couldn't keep it in. Gina, I know what's been going on. Her eyes darted away, but she didn't say anything. Not yet. I know about the money, about everything. My heart was pounding, but I pressed on. I've been paying your mom's bills, her rent, even putting money into her retirement. And you've known. You've known this whole time. Gina blinked like I'd just slapped her. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. You're overreacting, Rick, she finally said, her voice too calm. It's not what you think. I could feel the coldness between us, thicker than it had ever been. She wasn't even trying to deny it. She wasn't defending herself. No, I said, taking a step closer, my voice a little sharper now. No, Gina. I've been paying their bills, covering for your family's failures, and you've let me do it. You've sat there at the table while your mom makes me feel like I'm not good enough, while your brother brags about his new bike, and your sister buys new clothes, all while I'm footing the bill. Don't tell me I'm overreacting. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing away. It's just, you don't understand. We're going through a rough patch. The words felt hollow, a weak excuse. I was beyond hearing it. Rough patch? I asked, the bitterness rising in my throat. A rough patch for years, Gina, and you just let me keep sinking into it. You've known what your family's been doing, and you've been playing along, haven't you? Her face tightened, the defensive wall coming up. You're paranoid. You're making something out of nothing. I shook my head, feeling the anger churn in my gut. I'm not paranoid. I'm aware. You've been lying to me, Gina. You've been telling me we're just having some tough times when really your family's been taking me for everything I'm worth. Rick, I'm what? I cut her off, a crack in my voice now. I'm the one holding everything together, and you've been letting it happen. No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. I couldn't believe how cold she was. The woman I married, the one who'd promised me us against the world, was sitting across from me, denying everything, like she had no part in this. And then it hit me like a hammer. Gina wasn't just complicit. She was actively involved in this whole thing. She was the one coaching her brother, Tom, on how to play the I'm struggling card, how to make it look like they needed help when they didn't. She'd told her family about my supposed trust fund, painting me as some kind of limitless source of money. That was the last piece of the puzzle. Don't lie to me, I said, barely able to get the words out. You've been feeding them this story. You told them I have money I don't even have. You coached them on how to keep me paying. How long did you think I was going to be the fool, Gina? She didn't answer. She just sat there, frozen. I could see the guilt finally starting to show in her eyes, but it was too late. She hadn't backed me up when I needed her. She hadn't stood by me when I was giving her family everything I had. I was done. I stood up, feeling the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the way she'd made me feel so damn small. I'd spent 5 years trying to be the provider, the one who fixed everything, and in the end, I was nothing more than a paycheck to her. I turned to walk out, but before I did, I looked back. I'm not going to let this go. I'm done, Gina. And I left her sitting there, with her silence and her lies. For the next few weeks, I stayed quiet, but inside, I was unraveling. I couldn't just walk away from this. No, I needed proof. If I was going to blow this whole thing wide open, I had to be smart about it. So I started digging. First, I went through old emails. Nothing at first, just the usual bills, work stuff, the kind of things you don't think twice about. But then, I found a couple of threads where Gina was talking to her mom about me, specifically about money. They were so casual, like it was just another Tuesday conversation. I read one email from Gina to her mom, suggesting she could ask Rick for the money for the vacation, without making it seem like he was the only one contributing. It was like a playbook on how to manipulate me into paying for their lives. My stomach churned, but I kept reading. Then I found another conversation. This one was about me having a trust fund. A trust fund? I'd never even mentioned anything like that. That was the story she'd been telling her family, that I had some endless supply of money sitting in an account, waiting for her to tap into it. That was their excuse for constantly hitting me up for cash, because they thought I had an infinite source. I felt like a fool, a sucker. I couldn't believe she'd painted me as some kind of rich idiot to her family, all while I was busting my ass to keep their heads above water. I wasn't done. I went deeper. I dug into text messages, old ones, some sent months ago. There was one conversation between Gina and her mom talking about how they could ask Rick for a little more to cover a financial emergency. The emergency? Tom's new car. They'd been planning it probably for months. And there it was, clear as day. They were treating me like their personal piggy bank, not even trying to hide it anymore. That was the moment it hit me full force. I wasn't just pissed off at Gina, I was furious with her entire family. They'd been playing me from the start, using me for everything they could get. And Gina? She'd been in on it the whole time. She wasn't some clueless bystander. She'd been actively feeding them lies, letting them drain me, all while pretending to be the dutiful wife. I felt like I'd been living in a damn soap opera, the kind where you can't tell who the villain is until it's too late. But now, I had the proof, and I wasn't going to let this go. I started making plans. I knew this wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about me, my dignity, and getting back what they'd stolen from me. I couldn't stand the idea of letting them keep treating me like this, and I wasn't going to walk away quietly. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, something I'd been avoiding up until then. But now I needed professional help, someone who could guide me through what came next. I could already feel the fight brewing inside me. This wasn't going to be a quiet divorce. No, I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what had been happening behind closed doors. And if Gina and her family thought they could keep walking all over me, they were in for a rude awakening. As I sat in that lawyer's office, papers in front of me, I knew this was going to be messy. I knew the battle ahead would be public, maybe ugly, but it didn't matter anymore. I was done playing their game. I had the evidence. I had the power now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control. Gina's birthday dinner was the perfect setup. Her family would all be there. Tom, Amy, Helen, the whole crew. I knew it was my one shot to expose everything, to finally put an end to the lies. I'd been stewing in my own rage for weeks, gathering proof, getting ready for this moment. Now, I just had to hold it together long enough to make them see the truth. The dinner started like every other one. The same coldness from her family, like I didn't belong there. Helen, as usual, couldn't help herself. "It's nice you could make it tonight, Rick," she said with that thin smile of hers. "Roger would have been here by now if he hadn't been so busy with work." I didn't even look at her. I kept my focus on my plate, trying to keep my blood from boiling over. But it was hard, especially when I could hear Tom bragging about his new car, the one I knew I'd been indirectly paying for. "It's a hell of a ride," he said, grinning. "You should see the looks I get when I pull into the driveway." Amy chimed in right after, as if on cue. "I'm saving up for a new house," she said, looking at me like she had no idea how transparent she was. "It's going to be a stretch, but I think I can swing it." I swallowed my anger. It was all so goddamn obvious now. All of them, acting like nothing was wrong, oblivious to the fact that I was the one who'd been paying their bills, their luxuries, their lifestyle. I'd funded it all, and they were so wrapped up in themselves, they didn't even see it. Dinner dragged on, awkward as ever. I could feel my patience wearing thin, the tension building inside me like a storm ready to break. But I held my ground, letting the words swirl in my head. Tonight was the night. I wasn't going to leave that table without setting the record straight. Finally, after dessert, I couldn't take it anymore. My nerves were shot. I stood up, the sudden movement catching everyone's attention. The table went quiet, the air thick with expectation. I didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. I just looked at Gina and her family, steady, calm, and said, "I'm done." Gina's face faltered, but she didn't speak. The others were watching me, eyes shifting, like they were waiting for the punchline of some joke they didn't understand. But this wasn't a joke. I'm done paying for all of this. All of your mistakes, your needs, your luxuries. I've been the one carrying the weight for far too long, and it stops now. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling to the transfers I'd saved. The proof. The betrayal. I didn't need to say anything else. I just slid the phone across the table, letting the numbers speak for themselves. Medical bills, rent, vacations, a new car, all of it. The silence in the room was deafening. Helen's face went white, her mouth opening and closing like she was about to speak but couldn't find the words. Tom's smug grin vanished, replaced by the kind of confusion that only comes when someone's been caught red-handed. Amy just stared at the phone, her face slowly flushing. I looked at Gina. She was pale, too. Her eyes were wide, but she didn't move. I could feel her panic radiating from her, but she still didn't speak. Then she finally did, trying to regain some control. "Rick, you're overreacting. This isn't what you think. No," I cut her off, my voice steady but firm. "You've been lying to me, lying to your family, telling them I've got some endless stream of money when I've been struggling to keep this all together. And now you want to act like none of this matters?" She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. And that was it. The family that had always treated me like an outsider, like a fool, watching as I played the part of the dutiful husband, was finally starting to realize that I wasn't playing anymore. I wasn't going to keep quiet. I wasn't going to let them keep using me. The room was still silent, thick with tension. Gina was shaking her head, trying to deflect, but it was too late. The lies were exposed. Her own family could see her for what she really was. Gina's voice cracked as she tried to salvage whatever she could. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. We were just—" "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through her excuses. "You're done." Her face twisted in a mix of anger and regret, but there was no going back now. The truth was out, and I wasn't going to let her, or any of them, try to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. The silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a reckoning. A moment of truth, long overdue. The days after the dinner were a blur of tension, but I wasn't wasting any more time. I filed for divorce the very next morning. The papers were clear: financial fraud and emotional abuse. It wasn't just the money, though. That was the heart of it. It was everything. The manipulation, the lies, the years of feeling like I was just a bank account to them, all wrapped up in a neat little legal package. I wasn't going to let her, or her family, get away with it. I didn't just file and leave it at that. I sent copies of the divorce papers to Gina's family. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making them see the truth. They needed to know what they'd been part of. Maybe it was petty, but I didn't care. After everything, they deserved to know exactly how deep the lies ran. The fallout didn't take long to hit. Gina's family, who'd always relied on me to foot the bill, suddenly found themselves struggling. Tom had to sell his new car because he couldn't afford the payments anymore. The new house Amy had been saving for, that dream went up in smoke. Without me around to cover their mistakes, their world started to shrink, just like I'd always known it would. I didn't feel bad about it, not anymore. I was free of their drama, and that alone was worth the price of their fallout. As for me, I was finally starting to rebuild. I found a small apartment, not much but enough for me to breathe again. It was a far cry from the house I'd shared with Gina, but it felt freeing, like I could finally shed all the weight I'd been carrying. I downsized in a way that made sense, not to impress anyone but myself. And every day I woke up in that apartment, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was drowning in someone else's expectations. Work started to pick up again. Word of the legal battle spread through the industry, and with it came a wave of respect. People were reaching out to me, not just for business, but to tell me how they admired my integrity, my willingness to stand up for myself. It felt good to be recognized for the right reasons, for my skills, not my ability to pay everyone else's bills. I was done, completely. I'd closed the door on Gina, on her family, and all the baggage that came with them. There was no going back, no turning around to revisit the past. I had a new life now, one where I wasn't a doormat, one where I was no longer tethered to their lies and manipulation. I settled into my new apartment, and every day I felt more independent, more myself. I'd cut ties with everything that had weighed me down, and for the first time in years, I was waking up with a sense of peace. I wasn't chasing after someone else's approval. I wasn't living for people who only saw me as a means to an end. I was living for me. But then came the message. It was from Gina, a long, rambling apology, a plea to talk, to somehow fix what we'd lost. She claimed she'd changed, that she was different now, that she understood how wrong she'd been. I stared at the words on the screen, feeling the familiar tug of guilt and hurt, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Not this time. I'd heard it all before, the promises, the empty words. She could have apologized 1,000 times, and it wouldn't have changed anything. She'd made her choices, and so had I. I was too far along in my healing to go back and start picking at the wounds again, so I deleted the message without a second thought. I wasn't interested anymore. It was strange sitting there in my new place, feeling the finality of it all. For so long I had been angry. Anger had driven me, fueled me, but now, in its place, was something else. Something like relief. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to fix things that were never mine to fix, trying to please a family that was never going to appreciate me. The weight of that betrayal had been heavy, but it wasn't heavy anymore. I wasn't carrying it. I had the power to move on, and I had. The best part was, I didn't have to do it alone. About 6 months after I'd moved into my apartment, I met someone new. Her name was Clara. She wasn't complicated. She didn't have hidden agendas or skeletons in her closet. She was kind, funny, and most importantly, she didn't need me to be anything other than myself. We started seeing each other, slowly at first, but it didn't take long for me to realize just how different she was from Gina. Clara made me feel like I could be open again, like I didn't have to second-guess every word, every action. With her, I felt free.